I got to tell you, though, last night I had an anxiety dream. I dreamt that right before I came up here, I got really nervous, and I started off with a story about a time when I peed my pants. So I jumped up out of bed, and I thought, I hope that doesn't happen. So anyway, I was in the 3rd grade. And my teacher, Mrs. Defoni, she asked the class a question. She said, how many of you believe that the answer is X? And I knew the answer was X right away, so my hand shot up. But remember, I was in the 3rd grade, and I sat in the back left corner of the room, and I could see the whole other class, and not one other hand went up. So my hand started to come down real fast. But my teacher, she caught me. She said, don't you dare put your hand down. So I kept my hand up. She said, I want everybody in the class to turn around and look at Christian because he's the only one with his hand up. And I'm like, and it was in that moment where I think I peed my pants. Shoot, I told the story. She said, I want everybody to look because Christian is the only one who got the answer right, but he was going to put his hand down because the rest of you got it wrong. Then she looked me in the eyes and she said, in life, when you know you're right, it doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. You do what you know is right. And that moment changed my life. As I grew up and my bladder got stronger, I became a university professor. And I would frequently teach the concept of diffusion of responsibility. Sounds like a fancy term, but what it means is the more people who are around in a given situation, the less obligation we all feel to actually act. So if you're in a really crowded space and someone calls out for help, you're most likely going to think, well, there are a lot of people around, someone else will help. But I always taught my students, and I'm saying to you today, is that once you're aware of this concept, it is your job to act when people are in need. In Pennsylvania, we're doing a better job in regard to recidivism than many other places. But when we look at recidivism rates across the United States, we see some estimates as high as 70%. Let me put that in perspective for you. What that means is nearly 7 out of 10 people who leave prison will return at some point. 7 out of 10. That's not okay. It's time for all of us to stop diffusing our responsibility about this and start acting on what we know is right, which is to try to provide the type of environment in prison that changes this. I really believe that a big part of why recidivism rates are so high is that as a culture, we have a tendency to just write people off who commit crimes. I know a lot of people say, but to me, I want to say this. I'm not the first person to notice this, but in many ways, prison is like a timeout for adults. Except instead of just sitting there, a lot of times people pick up the type of negative behavioral patterns that aren't helpful on the outside. And a lot of people will say, like, but they hurt people. Who cares how they spend their time in there? Okay. But if 7 out of 10 people are reoffending, who do you think they're reoffending on? We're all in this world together. If somebody gets hurt, that's our brother or sister, mother or father, son or daughter. You can't wait until someone breaks in your home to let this message hit home that recidivism is all of our issue. I really believe that we write people off who commit violent crimes instead of trying to take the time to understand their perspective and teach them a more peaceful path. Now, I got to tell you, in the past, when I've even mentioned to take the time to understand someone's perspective who commits a violent crime, people have this visceral reaction. Like, understand their perspective. They need to understand ours. Okay, fair enough. Now, I don't know how many of you have had interactions with other human beings, but it's been my experience that people don't just change their perspective simply because you tell them to. If you really want to make a change in someone's life, you need to take the time to meet them where they are. If I'm standing on top of a mountain and I find out the people on the bottom of the mountain are lost, I can't just stand up on top of the mountain and scream, you should be up here with me already. What's that going to do? If I really want to help them make a change, I need to have the self-discipline to leave my spot, go meet them where they are, and help guide them up a different path. I created this approach called yield theory. And it's really about joining with people to really try to see the world through their eyes. It's about setting aside judgment and meeting them where they are with a ton of compassion, patience, and consistency to help them understand the reality of their choices. I recently studied my theory into prison, and what I did was I worked in a special management unit of the restricted housing unit, which is the whole, for those of you who aren't familiar with DOC lingo. But I worked with inmates and officers to get a better sense of what's happening in our prisons. I chose to go to prison because I knew if I wanted to make a dent in recidivism, I had to go meet inmates and corrections officers where they actually are, which is in the prison. The results of what I found, I am absolutely pleased to share with you today. For those of you who wonder, does compassion work with tough men? For those of you who are real interested in evidence-based approaches, I just want to point out that yield theory made a statistically significant difference in reducing assault rates among inmates who were classified as the most dangerous in the state of Pennsylvania. If I had a football right now, I'd spike it. I want to give you my sense of why I believe yield theory is effective. You know, we live in this world that seems to be enamored by the either-or mentality, the us versus them mentality. You're either Democrat or Republican. You're either left-wing or right-wing. You're either fundamentalist or atheist, good guy or bad guy. So I started thinking, how can I get in on this either-or type thinking? I thought, all right, I specialize in working with people who commit violent crimes for years. I've worked with thousands of people all over, including on the show Coaching Bad. And I've come to this profound realization that in life, there are only two types of people. There are people who have issues and dead people. So if you're not currently dead, that means you got issues. So do I. So does everybody. That's okay. Some of the most interesting people with issues I've encountered are those who, when they find out that I specialize in working with people who are convicted of violent crimes, have a funny, condescending, snarky way of asking me, why do you work with them? Them? Knowing what I know about two types of people, I usually just say, there is no them, there is only us. Although it's true that we all have issues, it's also true that for some people, somewhere along the way, those issues turn into violence, and violence is scary, and we want to know why. My wife and I have a beautiful 10-year-old little girl. She's the best thing on planet Earth. We're not even biased. She's the greatest person on planet Earth. She is really the sweetest, most kind person we've ever met. And one day, when she was in second grade, she came home from school and she was hurt because another little girl in her class had said something mean to her. And it's honestly just not in her character to even understand why would people be mean. So I took her into our meditation room at home where we have this glass coffee table. And I said, come here a second. I said, let's look down into this coffee table. Let's put our imagination hats on. And let's pretend that as we look down here, we see a labyrinth, okay? And the labyrinth is in complete darkness, but you and I got special goggles on so we can see into it. Let's pretend that we see people in there and they're bumping into each other all over the place and hurting each other. Should we be mad at those people for hurting each other? She said, no. I said, why not? She said, because they just couldn't see. And I said, you know, I think that's what happened with that little girl. I just don't think she could see. And I think that happens with all of us. We all hurt people. And there are things like guilt and shame to deal with it. And look, guilt's okay. Guilt's one of those things that we feel bad about what we did. Good, learn from it and grow. But shame is feeling bad about who we are. And my research has shown me overwhelmingly that when people live in shame, they act out of shame. If I think I'm a no good piece of nothing, then why not hurt you? To me, reform will happen when we move beyond shame and learn to really meet people where they are. We need to help each other see what we're doing. It's hard to see what we're doing because it's dark in this labyrinth for us. And I don't know that we ever really know what we're doing. You know what the ripple effect is, right? You take a pebble, you throw it in a pond, the waves ripple out further than the pebble. In regard to human interactions, I do something nice for someone, they do something nice for someone else, and on and on. Well, I was talking about the ripple effect in the prison. And this one inmate, he called me over. He said, Doc, he said, I learned about the ripple effect in the worst possible way. He said, I've been down for so long that I actually met my first victim in prison. And when I found out that he was in for raping a child, I knew in that moment that he only did to that child what I did to him so many years before. You talk about something hard to hear, the ripple effect of behavior. It's hard to hear stories of torture and abuse. It's hard to watch innocent people suffer. It makes sense why we want to just judge people and toss them off to a timeout. It makes sense. But the question I have for you today is this: how will any of that contribute to making our society safer and less violent? That man I just told you about, who has raped men, women, and children, not even his cellies were safe from his wrath. That man, here's the harsh reality: his prison sentence will expire before his life does. And I don't care what you think about that, because your opinion doesn't matter. What matters is the reality that it's happening. And there are thousands of people who are in prison right now who have hurt other people. Maybe they hurt them physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, financially. And one day, they will be in a different predicament on the outside. And a timeout is not going to do it justice. It's not going to help our society. We need to take the time to meet people where they are. And you know what? I've done this long enough that I can imagine people listening thinking, so that's your big research, meet people where they are? Who doesn't take the time to meet people where they are? And to those people, I have to say is, really? Like, you really never wanted someone to change so badly that you didn't have the time and patience to meet them where they were? Come on now. Come on. There was a blind man, he was at his friend's house, and it was getting to be dark outside, so he was getting ready to leave. And his friend said, here you go, man, take this lantern with you. And the blind man said, I don't need to take a lantern with me. I'm blind, I can't see. He said, the light's not for you, it's so that other people can see you. So the blind man takes the light. He starts walking home. Somewhere along the way as he's walking home, somebody checks him into him. Bam, lays him out. Lantern goes flying. Blind man gets real angry. He's like, what's the matter with you? You can't see my lantern? And as the stranger reaches down to help him up, he says, brother, your light burned out. Your light burned out. I think at times that's true for all of us. Our light's a little dimmer than what we really think it is. That's why we need each other. Because guess what? No matter how dark the labyrinth ever gets, the reality is that we still are always responsible for what we do in life. We might not be able to choose what happens to us in life, but we can always choose what we do with what happens in life. I met a man in the hole who defined himself as a criminal. He'd say, I'm a criminal, doc. I've always been a criminal. I always will be. People don't change. So I met him where he was. I used yield theory, worked with him for a couple months, and then he went out to court for about 30 days. And while he was gone, he found out that he was facing another 20 years of federal time on top of his state time when he was done. So he came back to the hole. And I came up to him at his cell door. And I'm standing there and I said, listen, man, I hate seeing you here, but we've always had some good conversations. I kind of miss talking to you. He stepped back off his door. He said, you know what? I kind of miss talking to you too, Doc. He said, but I don't want you to think that one day went by where I didn't think about the stuff that you taught me. And I realized something. I realized that the reason why you're standing on that side of the door and the reason why I'm standing on this side of the door is because in life, it all comes down to decisions. The decisions you made in life put you there, and the decisions I made in life put me here. And I said, oh, that hit me, man. That was beautiful. I said, you know what? We talk about the ripple effect all the time. And look, I know you just found out that you're going to be down another 20 years, but what you just said moved me. And I go everywhere. I speak to people all the time. And I'm going to spread your wisdom. I'm going to spread your message. And your words are going to impact people much farther than you and I could ever even realize. Recidivism and incarceration itself will change when we begin to take the time to meet people where they are. This isn't something that even needs to take place in just prisons. It needs to happen in prisons, but meeting people where they are, that needs to take place in schools, in sports, in businesses, and everywhere else where people interact and hope to make an impact with one another. Now listen, I got a whole bunch of life-changing stories that'll change your life forever, but I'm out of time. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wind this down with a tribute to my third grade teacher. And I'm going to ask you all a question, and I want you to raise your hand if you agree. How many of you believe that if you really want to see people make a change, you have to take the time to meet them where they are? See, it's time for us to stop diffusing our responsibility, because the impact that we have on the world, it reverberates and echoes much farther than we could ever imagine. It's time for us to begin to meet people where they are rather than where we think they should be. It's time for all of us to become the light in the labyrinth that will help people see. Listen to this. When you know what's right in life, don't look around you. Just do what you know is right. Because it's going to take all of us to fix this problem of recidivism. And if you remember nothing else, you got to remember this. There is no them. There's only us. Thank you so much. I wish you much peace.